roll call.
Clara Andriola.
Present.
Present.
Evan Fritzl.
Present.
Mike Rawson. Shelley Reed.
Here.
Kyle West.
Here.
Marilyn Kramer.
Here.
And Brandon Sindall.
Here.
Jim Rundle.
Here.
All right, we have almost everyone except for Commissioner Rawson. We'll move on to item 3, which is our first public comment section. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak at this time? Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment and move on to item 4, which is approval of the agenda.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda
Oh,
as
hold on.
submitted.
We have Commissioner Kramer is requesting permission to speak.
Oh, I'll second that motion, sir. So you need
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, you know what, I didn't get there in time, and it was.
You're there. You're
I
fine.
moved it.
Oh,
I moved to do it.
Yeah.
You moved it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I moved
Okay,
it.
so did now you second? Somebody just took it off.
Okay.
Kyle stole it from you.
I didn't hit the right buttons.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Kramer and a second by Commissioner West. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Carey, you are requesting to speak?
Yeah, I was a little confused by the new format. I didn't know if we requested to speak and then you calling us to make the motion, or you just hit submit.
It looks
submit
like
the
you just
motion.
hit the button to move.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say.
Okay, so we've
I
had
was
the motion by
confused.
Commissioner Kramer, second by Commissioner West, so any further discussion? Okay, if not, then please record your vote. Okay, motion passes unanimously. So then we'll move on to item 5, which is approval of the minutes. 5.1 is consideration and possible approval of the minutes of the Sparks Planning Commission study session for October 19th, 2021, and the Sparks Planning Commission meeting for October 21st, 2021. We have a motion by Commissioner Andriola and a second by Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Andriola, would you please read the motion?
I move to approve the minutes of the Sparks Planning Commission study session for October 19th, 2021, and the Sparks Planning Commission meeting for October 21st, 2021.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe I tried to raise my hand or whatever this new system is doing.
Go ahead.
I did push that. Anyway, thank you for calling on me. I just had a question for staff. I was curious why we're now taking study session meeting minutes and regular meeting minutes in one separate motion. The reason I bring up that,
You're saying why these aren't
yeah, why?
separated
Because
out?
it was typically two different action items before.
Yeah, I mean, it could, I mean, really, under the open meeting law, we could combine all 4 of them into one. You can combine them all into one, and then there can be distinctions between each one. Yeah, I think we could do it either way.
Thank you for that. And I didn't know if it was just because of the new voting system, but I've always kind of preferred to take them separately. And I think if moving forward, I don't have a problem tonight, but I think moving forward, to have them as separate agenda items where we could take them individually. If there were changes to the meeting minutes that were being considered, I think it may be easier if we had it as its own separate agenda item moving forward in case we can make changes. Not sure how the rest of the commission feels, but that's kind of how it's been done as its own separate motion or agenda item. That's all I have for discussion.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Carey. Any other discussion?
Couldn't find the right button. But I actually like them being combined. I think that it's fine. I think if you did want to take take a particular item and address it in the minutes, I think that's fine, whether they're combined or not. That's my personal preference.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Kramer?
Mr. Chair, I agree with Commissioner Reed. I think that both items can be combined into one, and if there is an issue with either one of the minutes,
Item.
we
which is
can
where you
pull
should
that
say.
particular one out and make the changes that need to be made at that time. And it just saves, I think it saves staff time to combine them as one. Maybe not a lot, but enough. They're all together. It's pretty much about the same meeting. So combining them makes sense to me as well.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, please record your votes for those who haven't yet. All right, and motion passes unanimously. All right, so now 5.2, consideration possible approval of the minutes of the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee study session of October 19th, 2021, and the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee meeting on October 21st, 2021. We have a motion by Commissioner Kramer, a second by Commissioner Andriola. So Commissioner Kramer, would you please read your motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes of the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee study session on October 19th, 2021, and the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee meeting on October 22nd, 2021.
All right, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, please vote. And motion passes unanimously. All right, we have no public hearing items tonight, so we will move on to item 7, which is general business. And we have presentation and possible discussion regarding open meeting laws, Public Records Act, and ethics.
All right, good evening, Chair Prutzos, members of the commission. Brandon Sendall, Senior Assistant City Attorney, your attorney, the attorney for the Planning Commission. As requested by Commissioner Carey about 2 months ago, we decided, and there have been some new additions to the Planning Commission. And we're presenting a general training on some of the main issues that you see, mainly open meeting law, public records, and a little bit on Robert's rules at the end. And what did I miss?
Ethics.
Ethics.
Darn
Okay,
little ethics.
and as I go, if a question pops into your head, just, go ahead and do it, because we're gonna be going through a few topics, so probably better to get the question out during that topic rather than at the end. I guess after each topic, I'll stop and ask if there are any questions on that issue, but I'm gonna start with open meeting law. It obviously comes up pretty much every meeting we're at. So I'm just going to start with the general legislative intent in the open meeting law and the statute. And it's that all public bodies exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. It's the intent of the law and these are the two key buzzwords in the open meeting law, that actions and deliberations are conducted openly. You'll see those two words come up repeatedly. So, the general objectives is to make sure that meetings that are supposed to be done in public do occur in public to enable public participation. And, it's to avoid those backroom deliberations, whether real or made up. And it just furthers the concept of open government. So, in general, what does it apply to? It applies to public bodies. That just means a group of people. It doesn't apply to any one person specifically because you're not a group, you're not a body. But any body that either spends money or makes recommendations on spending money or is supported by tax revenue, basically that's you. So, as the commission, as the body itself. So, when does it apply? I did not mean to do I actually don't like that. When does it apply? It applies to meetings. There's three key words. It's a meeting, which is a quorum, in which there's a quorum of the public body, and that includes electronically over a Zoom meeting or a teleconference, anything like that, to either deliberate toward a decision or to take action on a decision. So in the case of the Planning Commission, if there's 4 people together that are either exchanging views, exchanging facts on an issue that could come before the Planning Commission, or obviously taking action on an issue, then that's a meeting, and that needs to be done in public with an agenda with notice to the public. So we'll get into a little bit of that. Just a side note, it does include serial communications. There have been instances where public bodies have tried to get around the open meeting law by having a three-person discussion here and then a different three-person discussion here, called it serial communications. That's one meeting if you're using those smaller meetings to get around the open meeting law. There are exceptions, and this actually could fall within the exception. One is attorney-client on active litigation or potential litigation. Our office has that with the city council somewhat regularly. Doesn't apply to you as much or as often. The other is training sessions. We initially had this in an open meeting because we were going to discuss the Planning Commission rules of procedure, but it might have run a little long, so we're going to be bringing that before the Planning Commission either next month or in January. But there might have been some deliberation on that, so that's why we had it in a public meeting. But even after bringing it, even the appearance of having a backroom meeting, it's better just to err on the side of openness. And if there's going to be a quorum, let's notice it. So training sessions, and the last one is social functions. This comes up a lot where, it's the rib cook-off or the hometown Christmas parade where you have a quorum of a body. We see it a lot with the city council, and we've seen it with the planning commission where there's even the APA conference or the Nevada APA conference, any conference like that where you have a quorum. That is an exception to the open meeting law as long as there's no deliberation on an item that could possibly come before you. So I will say that one little caveat, legally that's not subject to open meeting law, but it can invite the appearance of a violation. So generally our office advises everybody to be careful in those situations and I'm not saying you can't talk to anybody, but if you have all four people together talking, or in the case of the city council, all three people in a corner talking, it just invites the appearance of a violation. So
I have a quick question then.
Yeah.
Do you and Jim count towards there being a quorum? Oh, so if it was me and Scott talking with you and Jim about something, that's not
no, that's not
because
open meeting law.
because you're
Yeah.
not voting members?
Mhm.
Okay,
It has to be 4 out of 7 of the actual sitting commissioners.
gotcha, okay.
So this takes place before the meeting. This is more on the staff level with Mr. Rundle, myself, Ms. Ruiz, all the other planners. It's the actual notice that has to be posted publicly 3 days before the meeting. Time, place, where's it going to be? What are we going to consider? Contact information for, hey, I want to get the meeting materials. And most importantly, the agenda. I will note, and this recently came up at a school board meeting, additional notice is required for consideration of a person's character or their misconduct or competence. For example, whenever there is a contract up for renewal, say the city manager has to get advance notice because there's going to be conversation about the city manager's competence and whether their contract should be renewed. So, and this is in there to avoid blindsiding somebody saying, oh, you're incompetent or you're corrupt or anything like that. There needs to be notice, and that's where the legal counsel on the end or the chair also needs to step in and remind everybody, you're not supposed to do that. You need to give a person notice if there's going to be discussion of their character or their competence. That doesn't occur as much here, but I just wanted to flag that. So, as you know, the agenda items and the motions to approve can sometimes be a little lengthy, but it's really just trying to comply with the requirements of the open meeting law. Mainly, that's the clear and complete statement for each topic. There have been times where public bodies in the agenda, the agenda title just doesn't match what the actual potential action is gonna be, or what the deliberation is gonna be. So, you know, the open meeting law, or the AG's office in enforcing the open meeting law has been pretty clear. You know, it's just, it needs to give the public reasonable notice on what's actually going to happen. Each action item has to have for possible action. That's, you know, part of our work before we actually post it. Public comment that we do. Notification that items can be combined, removed, delayed, taken out of order, and any restrictions on public comment. That's pretty much that first page that everybody glosses over when they turn to the second page. So what does it mean that it has to be clear and complete? I mentioned this before on the last slide, but it's basically that incomplete and poorly written agendas deprive the public of their right to take part in government. If you don't really explain what's going to happen, then people who read the agenda don't know what you're going to be considering. So, you know, the staff does a pretty lengthy review the week leading up to posting, and, you know, I know there have been a couple of small errors in the past, but it's a really collaborative process among the staff. We really try to make sure that we give as thorough of an explanation of what the Planning Commission is going to be doing. And that's the general test. Does it give the public notice as to what topics or what actions could occur? And so I'm going to go to sticking to the agenda. This is probably one of the things that happens most often is, you know, discussion can't exceed the scope of the agenda. And it goes back to why we have the agenda in the first place. We post it, we tell the public, this is what we're going to be considering on Thursday night at 6 o'clock in the legislative building. And then if the discussion veers away from that, we didn't give the public notice 3 days in advance. Nobody knows that the Planning Commission was going to discuss that topic. That's why you see either chairs or legal counsel at these meetings sometimes have to rein in conversation, because that is an open meeting law if discussion goes sideways on a topic that wasn't on the agenda. Public comment. It's basically a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. The general accepted practice is 3-minute limitations. The big no-no obviously is viewpoint-based. You know, oh, you're gonna approve this, or you shouldn't have approved this, or anything on the viewpoint of that public comment cannot be shut down or restricted. If it's a viewpoint neutral, you know, this topic doesn't even apply to what the Planning Commission considers, or it's just willfully disruptive, it can be shut down by the chair. Now, this is a kind of a niche issue, but it's actually come up with the city and a couple of different boards, and it's happening all over the state because it's a really weird part of the open meeting law, and that's new topics brought up in public comment. Because you have the general rule, if it's not on the agenda, you can't talk about it, right? But I don't want to say it's a contradiction. It's a really narrow exception where if somebody comes up at the end and talks about something that was completely out of left field that's on the agenda, you can discuss it, but you can't deliberate on it. And that line, I spent probably 45 minutes looking at AG opinions and really looking at the language. And where I've come out on this is, you know, say somebody says, you need to discuss X. You can discuss it, but the restriction is on collective deliberation. So the way I see that is a person could say, you know, yes, we should put that on a future agenda. Mr. Rundle, would you please include that on a future agenda so we can discuss it? Once there becomes collective discussion, that's when it constitutes deliberation, and that's what we can't do. And if that comes up, you know, obviously I or someone else will be over there. But to be honest, I read through probably the last 20 AG open meeting law opinions, and I think 4 of them were on this. There were a lot. So I guess my advice would be to avoid collective discussion, because that's deliberation that is not allowed if it's not placed on the agenda. And generally, I would just advise that you, if there is a topic that you want to discuss, ask for it to be included on a future agenda.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Commissioner Terry.
Along those same lines on that slide, one thing that's come up, I think when we have a lot of public comment, is a member of the public will bring up a question, about like something that was in the staff report or some sort of a technical question. How would you advise that the commission handle those questions? Because sometimes I think a lot of the time, the public, they'll phrase that question, they'll like want us to answer it as a body. How should we address those sort of situations?
Well, I mean, if it relates to the topic that's on the agenda, then it's fair game. It's been agendized. Either any one of you could comment on it or ask either the applicant or staff to comment on it. I think that would be appropriate. If it's something that's not on the agenda, then I think explaining that, this wasn't on the agenda, we can briefly discuss it, but we can't get into this with you, and I would ask that Mr. Rendell put it on a future agenda. That would be my advice.
So if it is a question related to that topic, because I don't know, we had in the past, maybe traffic counts. They're asking about, we have a proposed subdivision, and they're asking about traffic counts. Well, how much traffic is this gonna create? And a member of the public will be like, well, and I think that it's been the practice of this commission that, we let them take their 3 minutes and then we kind of let staff handle it afterwards. But you're saying, and it kind of gets into the deliberation and engagement. I was just kind of curious how we should handle those sort of situations if it does relate to the item.
Yeah, if it relates to the item, I think either you could comment on it or just allow staff, if somebody from staff is coming up to address it, or ask staff to address it. I think a lot depends on the timing of it.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
In past practice, at many public hearings that I attend, the practice that I see is we let public comment complete. Maybe the chair says, this is public comment. We won't address during public comment, but we will ask staff up after the conclusion, because you've been in planning commission meetings and we've got 50 people in here. You don't, in my opinion, I don't think you want to ask all of those questions individually, because there may be redundant questions that you can bring staff up later. In past practice, again, what staff prefers is that at the conclusion of public comment, if it is something that the chair desires to bring staff back up, they ask them, will you address the question on traffic, or will you address the question on landscaping? Not necessarily, will you address all those questions? Because there can be so many, you may not know which ones you want to address. And so sometimes it's helpful if the board says, please address specifically these questions, and bring them back up. And like Commissioner Carey said, you can also ask the applicant up. They can come back up after public comment. That has been a practice of most boards, that they can come up and address certain questions. And then you may want to watch staff's reaction. They may want to contest something that the applicant has said, and it may be something staff doesn't support or doesn't agree with, because the staff is representing the city and the master and the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinances or best practices, not necessarily the applicant.
Yeah,
So really, this comes up more often at the public comment at the very end of the meeting, where the public hearing items are already done, because public comment during the public hearing item is almost always on the agendized item, right? So you're rarely going to get into an issue with that unless it's just completely out of left field, in which case you're probably not going to engage in it anyway. But this usually happens at the end of the meeting. You need to talk about this thing that was completely unrelated to what you deliberated on and took action on in the meeting, and demanding an answer right now. That's where this usually comes up. And a lot of times public bodies will say, hey, we can't touch it, it wasn't on the agenda. You can briefly discuss it, but the best practice is to ask to put it on a future agenda if you want it to be on a future agenda.
Brandon, could you also, Mr. Chair, sorry, could you also, after the public comment is done, ask staff to please reach out to that person that just made that public comment and
of course.
discuss it with them?
Mhm.
As an appropriate, as something appropriate, I mean, if
Yes.
they're asking for traffic counts and we don't, that wasn't information or whatever, or landscape or whatever the issue is, I just think that maybe consideration of this board's time and everybody else's, that maybe staff might, one of us could say, or the chair could say, could you please, staff, could you please discuss that with this person? So that they have a better understanding of what it is they're talking about
Yeah.
and what we're doing.
Yes, I think that would be completely appropriate.
All right.
Okay, so, one last little bit, there was a new bill, AB 253 in the last legislative session that allowed non-elected public bodies to hold basically Zoom public meetings. So, just a little tidbit, we're going in person now, but everybody except the city council or any elected body could technically still do a Zoom meeting. The main issue here as far as violations is any action taken in violation of the open meeting law is void. Public bodies often have to take corrective action if there is an open meeting law. Usually it's a slap on the wrist, but, in more egregious cases there can be, misdemeanor or civil penalties. But I've never, in my experience, seen that happen.
Brandon, I think we had a penalty during the open meeting law violation that went to the Supreme Court with council member Solano,
Salerno?
Kerrigan, wasn't it?
Phil Salerno, and I believe he got a citation
Was it?
levied.
Okay. But again, those are fairly rare, and it's
Exceptionally
usually in
unique. Yeah.
the more egregious violations. Yeah. I don't know the facts of that one. I'm not saying it was egregious, but.
But
Okay.
it does happen, it has happened. Just to say, I've seen it, Mr. Chair.
And just a quick link to the open meeting law manual, but really, if you ever have any questions, just reach out to me. I can answer any questions. Any other questions on open meeting law?
No, I just want to
I
say
thought-
that this information is really good. I appreciate you presenting it because you think you know all the facts and then you don't really know all the facts. So I think this is really good information. I appreciate this.
Right, thanks. Okay, I was told earlier today when I had a remote court appearance, I needed to speak up longer, so I appreciate it. Speak a little louder. Any other questions on open meeting law? Okay, Public Records Act. I think you will all remember the public records request that we just got a few months ago. So hopefully this is a little fresh in your head. But general rule is all public records of a governmental entity are open for inspection, copying, or receipt by any person. So how does that apply to you? Technically, by the statute, you individually are a governmental entity. The statute defines governmental entity as both the city itself or the county itself or the state itself, as well as elected or appointed officers of the state. But regardless, city actions and city documents are subject to public inspection and copying. That's the general gist of it. So, what is a public record, though? I mean, it's not just records maintained by the city. It's not just city emails on the city's Outlook server, the copies of the staff reports that are over in City Hall. I mean, it's pretty broad. It's if it relates to the provision of a public service. So that's both at the city staff level, the city councilman level, the mayor level, and any boards and commissions like the planning commission. So what you need to take away from this is it's the content or the substance of a record and not the location or the account. So there have been two pretty big Supreme Court cases the last 5 years. The first was Las Vegas Metro Police Department versus Blackjack Bonding. It was basically Metro had contracted out to a third party to facilitate their inmate calls. And the media asked, it was a member of the media, made a public records request and asked for it. And they said, that's them. They're not the government. We can't get that for you. And Supreme Court said, no, that's the provision of a public service. You can't get around the Public Records Act by hiring an outside third party. That doesn't apply to you as much, but I mean, I've included it here just to kind of cement that it's whether it's the provision of public service and not where it's at, because those records were housed in a third party's business location. They weren't in City Hall or any other government area, but they were still subject to the Public Records Act. The other more recent one was Lyon County. There was an HOA who asked for all communications, and that included cell phone and email records from county commissioners on a vote. And the public records request clarified that they wanted it regardless of if it was on a public or a private account or a device. Your personal email, your Gmail account, your personal text on your phone. Lyon County denied it. Supreme Court said, no, if you're conducting public business on your Gmail account, then that's a public record. If you're conducting public business in a text message, that's a public record. So just because it's in your Gmail account, your AOL, I don't know if we're still doing that.
God, I hope
or
not.
or a text, that's a public record. Now, I don't want to overstate this and scare everybody. Your purely private texts are not public records. So the takeaway is, even on your private phone and accounts, if you're discussing city business, then it's technically a public record. And I included Coach Gruden here as an example. The Raiders, the NFL, is not subject to the Public Records Act, and those still came out. So it's more just a cautionary tale. Be careful what you put in writing, especially as it relates to your business as a planning commissioner. And that includes communications to city staff and outside parties. There was the Public Records Act or the Public Records request that we received a few months ago asking for all of your communications with a consulting firm. And there wasn't much, but that is an appropriate public records request. So be careful. Don't put it in writing if you don't want it in the RGJ. Penalties, the main thing is if they sue and they win and you have to turn it over, they get attorney's fees, but there can be civil penalties for willfully failing to comply. If it comes out that anybody, hid a record that should have been public, there can be civil penalties. Any questions on public records? I won't make you give up purely private communications, I promise. So the last big topic is ethics. Comes up a lot in conflicts of interest with either family members or financial interests, things like that. So general ideas, it applies to public officers and public employees. That includes pretty much everybody in this room. Sparks Municipal Code also implies ethical standards, but the state standards are a little more stringent actually, and that's usually what you're going to be looking at. And the general outline is, misuse of an official governmental position to benefit your personal interests is prohibited. It sounds simple, but it can get a little nuanced. So, what are the general things that are prohibited? Obviously, gifts that could influence your decision, and that includes seeking or accepting. So, don't ask for one. But also just self-dealing if you have an interest in an item that you're voting on, unlawfully suppressing public records, insider use of some non-public information for financial gain, personal use of government resources, and influencing of subordinates for your gain. There's a long list. Actually, that second to last one, seeking other employment through use of your official position. And I've heard of a couple instances of that. But those are the ones that come up more often, but there's a long list. So there are two issues. One is when you identify a possible conflict like that, there's disclosure and there's actually abstaining from the vote. Disclosure is mandatory on any of them at a minimum. And we'll go into this more, but usually that's all that's required. So if there's a gift or a loan, a substantial, the statute uses the word pecuniary, it's basically a financial interest. A commitment in a private capacity to the interests of another person. That just basically means I have such a relationship with this person in a private capacity that it would influence me. We'll get into that a little bit more, and then representation of a private client. But the main thing is it has to be disclosed during that item and before the discussion, before any discussion, any action. And it has to be sufficient to inform the public what the actual nature of the potential conflict is. So what are they? Gift or loan? I'm not going to go into that, but substantial pecuniary interest is basically an interest that can be measured in money. You know, you have some sort of economic value, future payments, something like that in an item that's in front of the Planning Commission. That other one, the commitment in a private capacity, it's basically the interests of another person that could influence you. That's a domestic partner, household member. Third degree of consanguinity, nieces, nephews, parents, aunts, uncles. If you have any questions on that, I'll look to the chart because I never know exactly where it is off the top of my head. A person who employs you or a domestic partner or another household member, things like that. You know, hey, the applicant is X developer and my niece works for that developer. You know, you need to explain that, what that relationship is, and then, you know, we'd have to have a discussion on whether it's just disclosure or actually abstaining from the vote. A person with a substantial business relationship, and then there's just a general catch-all. There's actually a state ethics manual. They use an example of, you know, it's not a blood relative, but it's somebody that I grew up with and that I consider a sibling, and it doesn't fall into any of these, but it's basically the same thing, so I need to disclose it, and I'm abstaining, that sort of thing. There is the general catch-all. Maybe it doesn't fit cleanly in one of these categories, but it does influence you, something like that. So, again, what's required? It's usually just disclosing it before the item's heard. Yeah, so the state ethics law says that you must not approve, disapprove, vote on, or abstain from voting on anything that we've talked about without first explaining the nature of the issue such that the public knows what the issue is and so that they can understand the potential impact on your vote. And it has to be, again, at the time the matter is considered. That said, you know, there is a presumption under the state ethics law that voting is permissible. It recognizes, you know, that people in your position and in other boards and commissions are put there to vote. So the state law actually requires the Commission on Ethics to give weight and deference to the public policy favoring the right of a public officer to perform the duties that you were elected or appointed to do. The idea is that abstaining from voting disrupts the normal course of representative government. Deprives them of their appointed members of the Planning Commission. But sometimes you do have to abstain. So this is straight out of the state ethics law. It's required only in clear cases where the independence of judgment of a reasonable person in your position would be materially affected. So it uses an objective standard rather than whether you think you're subjectively influenced. So it does make it a little difficult. But that is the case. It's where a person in your position would be materially affected.
How do you determine that?
It's a case-by-case basis.
Fair enough.
Call the Brandon's office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes to the very bottom of the slide. You know, our office can help. We've dealt with a handful of these. Every issue is fact specific. Depends on the person, if it's the applicant, if it's more tangential. But the main thing is it's hard to do that on the spot because you have to look at the actual language of the statute and do it. So just try to recognize these before they come up so that, you know, we can have a one-on-one discussion and figure that out. And also, you know, if you need, come up with a script so that, you know, you can inform the public what the issue is so that the public knows what it is. And, you know, if you're not abstaining or if you are abstaining, you know, that explanation is enough.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Commissioner Carey.
Thank you. So Brandon, along those lines, if you do have to abstain, it should be for a specific conflict. It shouldn't be for any sort of convenience. There has to be a clear conflict under those
Yes.
those other cases. Because I know that has happened.
Yeah, where elected officials or appointed officials abstain too much. Yeah, that has happened before, and that's why, you know, there is the presumption that you shouldn't abstain. There is the presumption that you're here to do a job and that you should vote, and that generally you're not going to be influenced by different relationships. But there does become a point where abstention is necessary, and it's mainly on those financial dealings and the close personal relationships. You know, obviously, if there's a development in front of you, this is the obvious case, and you're a part owner of the company, you're going to abstain from that because you're going to directly benefit financially from that. Those are the easy cases. Those are the cases that don't usually come up. Usually it's, you know, something a little less than that, and it requires a little more analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And the state ethics manual really does have a great script to walk through, a great, you know, step-by-step, what is it, and describe the conflict, describe what it is, whether it would or would not affect the judgment of a person in your position, and whether you're going to abstain or not abstain. So we can create one very similar to yours. So the important thing is there's a safe harbor under the state ethics law that there is no willful violation of the ethics law if you rely in good faith on the advice of basically me or someone in our office, and the advice was provided before the vote, deliberation, or action, and was based on a reasonable determination. So, you know, if we talk about it and, you know, we get into it and decide yes or no either way, or okay, no, you don't need to abstain, and then somebody files an ethics complaint, you know, as long as my advice isn't bonkers, there's a safe harbor from a finding of a willful violation. And if there is enough time, you know, the Commission on Ethics provides confidential advisory positions, so that is also another option. And there are penalties. These I've seen come up a little more often in some ethical violations, but there can be civil penalties for willful violations. So, you know, if you're relying on legal advice, these are. I've never heard of one being imposed when somebody's acting on the advice of legal counsel. But also, if the violation resulted in a financial benefit, because that's the biggest no-no, then there can be a bigger civil penalty based on the amount that you benefited. Any questions on ethics? I mean, my big takeaway is if you're reading the agenda for a future meeting and something goes off in your head, give me a call ahead of time and we can talk about it. I know a few of you already have done that. Just keep doing it. And then this is just a pretty quick one, Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules, it's basically a parliamentary procedure guide. It's a traditional guide on how public meetings should run. That said, it's not the open meeting law. If you violate a rule of the Roberts rules by itself, that's not gonna be a violation of open meeting law. You know, the Planning Commission and its rules of procedure have adopted Roberts rules as the general procedure moving through an open meeting law. It's best practices, but, you know, it isn't the actual law. But, you know, why do we need it? Why do we go through the motion practice and running the motion through the chair and all that? I mean, really, it's to have consistent meetings at the city. Yeah, that's both between boards and commissions and just meeting to meeting with the same commission. It just ensures order, you know. I don't know how many public meetings you've been to. I've been to way too many. Yeah, too many. Probably not as many as Commissioner Carey, but you know, there are times that they just go off the wall. You know, something gets pushed through without any discussion or too much discussion. Everybody's talking over each other. They can get pretty unruly fast. I actually watched the recent Clark County School District meeting.
Oh, wow.
That
must have been painful.
I was more just curious than anything. It was when I was creating this. I mean, common sense doesn't always prevail on it. You know, there are times, actually it happened at that meeting where there was a motion on the issue to be decided. Someone else made a motion to adjourn, and that actually takes precedence over the motion on the item itself. It's a weird wrinkle. It doesn't always make sense, but yeah, that.
So I could just
And
stop this
sometimes,
right now.
and you know what? I don't know it all. Sometimes if there's a weird issue, if there's a question on procedure, I might have to take a little break and research it. You know, we haven't had any real weird things come up since I've been the commission's attorney, but you know, I just want to stress that the reason we run the meetings the way we do is we're generally following Robert's rules, and it's just decorum and order. And so the nuts and bolts, you know, who's in control of the meeting? It's the chair, you know, or in the case of the city council, it's the mayor. What else can Robert's rules help with? You know, it's the different individual roles, quorums, the going through the agenda and the standard order of business and the motion practice and all that, and maintaining orderly deliberations so that people aren't talking over each other. Won't go too far into depth because we generally have a planning commission that follows it, but I just wanted to mention that at the end of the presentation. This is why we do what we do. You can buy a copy. I don't think you should. You can borrow mine anytime you want.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I actually have a question in terms of Robert's Rules of Order, specifically addressing the need or the requirement. Under Robert Rules of Order, there isn't a requirement for an adjournment to have a motion to adjourn.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a requirement by public meeting or any type of compliance requirement by statute that requires public meetings to actually have a motion in play for adjournment?
Not that I know of, no. I
just wanted to bring that up because I think that's a very clear misconception.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I'd have to double check on this. I'm not 100%. I think Robert's Rules recommends a motion to adjourn, but it's not, no? No?
I'm pretty,
Well,
I'm surely not ready to take the parliamentary. I'm not ready to take the Robert's Rules of Order test. But on this particular, I'm very familiar with it, and I'm just suggesting from my memory and from my research and my recollection. There isn't a requirement, but it's always interesting under many commissions that I've served and chaired in various positions of a public body with compliance regulation by statute. It's such a misunderstanding. So I just wanted to clarify that.
and really, I would just say, you know, even if it did recommend it or say you should,
Yeah.
you're not going to go to Robert's Rules jail for not doing it.
I feel like we were just doing that when we were on Zoom, just kind of so it was easier to know like, okay, we're wrapping up, whereas like, since when we're all sitting here, it's not as big a deal.
I don't ever recall doing a motion when I was chair. Do you remember, Commissioner Carey?
We've kind of gone back and forth over the years. It's kind of my recollection. I would agree with Commissioner Andriola. I don't think there's anything in Robert Rules of Order that requires it.
I'll take a little test on that one.
Yeah.
I've
And-
researched it a lot, because
But-
I've run a lot of meetings based on Robert Rules of Order, and the more you know, the more you're effective in terms of either being support or actually being in a leadership position. So I just bring it up because I think in the excellent job that you've done, and I agree with Commissioner Reed in terms of thank you for doing this. I also want to share just in closing that, from my perspective, I have no idea, if this is my last time or not, but you guys are amazing. Staff at the City of Sparks is amazing. And I say that because I've had the utmost fun and adventures with other bodies. And so I just really want to thank you all for really doing an exemplary job in every aspect that I've had in the short period of time dealing with you. And I've lived in this area for 8 years. And Sparks is always like number one, man. When you want something done, go to Sparks. And I think you continue that tradition. So kudos to you and thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Following up on some of your initial comments, Commissioner, and the verification that Robert's rule does not require a motion. There have been a handful of boards that I'm on, so they're not necessarily elected boards, and to an extent, you're an appointed elected board, but there are some rules of procedure that are adopted by the board that actually have a requirement for a motion and a second to adjourn a meeting. Not necessarily applicable to Sparks Planning Commission, but I have been on some because I've brought up, oh, we don't need to do this, and then they show me in the rules of procedure it requires it. So we continue it. But just a comment as potentially as you serve on other boards outside of this capacity, that it may be something that is in a unique place, like a rule of procedure that for some reason that board adopted.
Thank you for the clarification, because I think all policies with boards have their uniqueness. So, yeah, I just wanted to thank you for clarifying that as well.
And Mr. Chair, if I may jump in to add to the discussion here, my quick perusal of the Planning Commission's rules and procedures, I don't see that we require a motion to adjourn. Maybe this is something when we bring up the rules and procedure at a future date that we can kind of, as a commission, decide once and for all.
I accept your offer of dictatorial power to end meetings.
And
Guess that's
and
what
our
I did.
and our rules of procedure will be coming up at a meeting soon.
But you gotta start using that gavel.
Well,
More
in like 3
effective.
months, it's your
They're more
gavel.
effective. Come on.
All right, any other questions? Okay, see none. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Thank
That was
you.
very informative and very helpful.
Now we get a quiz?
Only if you ask.
No.
First time I remember clapping after somebody's presentation, so.
Especially from the city attorney's office, right?
Let the
So
record
the-
reflect.
Yeah, let's go.
People love lawyers.
All right, so we are on to item 8, which is announcements. So we'll start with staff announcements. Any announcements from staff?
Mr. Chair, on Monday at the Sparks City Council meeting, the Sparks City Council will be reviewing the proposed ward boundaries that are in compliance with the 2020 census. So the wards potentially will be redrawn in the city of Sparks for the 5 council member ward districts by at the conclusion of the Sparks City Council meeting on Monday. In addition, there'll be a first reading on the item for the Legends Handbook, which the staff presented at the last Planning Commission meeting regarding potentially some multifamily residential and signage amendments for the casino And I think those are the two items regarding the planning staff will be presented at, well, it won't be presented, it'll be a first reading on Monday, be presented before your next council meeting for the handbook amendments. But the ordinance for ward boundaries could occur on Monday. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, any announcements from commissioners? Commissioner Carey.
I had one. I tried to hit request speak again. Yeah, just want to thank staff for the presentation and the training today. I thought that was really helpful. And to kind of accompany the staff, I brought for the commission a copy of the Nevada Planning Guide. This is a publication that's put out by the APA, the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association, and it has some good supplementary information about open meeting law and ethics, but it's really a good one-stop shop for really all things planning, how master plan laws work and zoning, and I think it's just a helpful resource. So I brought some printed copies for everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Carey.
That's nice.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I stole them from the state planning conference.
Are you putting that on the record?
I'd actually change that term.
Cover your ears, Brent.
Yes, yeah, I
We
borrowed
were
them.
kind enough to.
They didn't want to haul them back to Las Vegas, so
Volunteer.
I stole some extra copies for everybody.
Mr. Chair, if you'd entertain going back to item 8.1, I guess if another staff comment.
Yep.
For the commission, moving forward, we do, I anticipate we will be utilizing the second meeting of the month as the primary meeting, which is a change in the direction that the Planning Commission has gone for a long time. That's typically the third Thursday of the month as opposed to the first Thursday of the month. We will use that meeting for the primary Planning Commission, and then the following month's first meeting if we needed a second meeting, if that makes any sense. But again, the third Thursday will become the primary. So as you look at your calendars for the year, anticipate utilizing that third meeting more often than we ever have before. That will provide staff time with the way the agenda system works to have ample time, appropriate amount of time to review staff reports, compose the staff reports, and get them to the Planning Commission on time in compliance with some of the things Brandon talked about today, open meeting law and those kinds of things. That will help the staff get those to you on time.
All right, thank you. So are we anticipating December 16th then for the next meeting as opposed to the second?
Yes, that's the date.
Perfect, thank
And
you.
then, of course, study session would be on the Tuesday prior to that meeting, so the 14th for that one.
All right, thank you very much. All right, any other announcements? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 9, which is our second public comment section. Any members of the public want to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment. And item 10, I've been told I can just adjourn, so we are adjourned.
Thank you.